Hello everyone, I'm Regan and I'm joined here by Kate Forbes, and we just thought it would be quite an interesting and hopefully fun and light-hearted attempt to capture and perhaps mark the fact that it's 1 year on from the S&P leadership contest last year. Things have changed. Both of us, well, I was sort of government adjacent by the February, but you were still in government, and now I'm leading another party in Hollywood and Kate's on the backbenches. So it just shows you how these things can work out. But do you want to start by doing the first question?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's inevitable that this latest discussion is definitely more lighthearted.
Yes.
And probably more fun than the last time we were on a stage together.
Oh gosh, yeah. What was the last one? It's
I think the
probably in
last
here.
one would have been the BBC actually.
Oh,
because
yes.
the nominations had closed, the ballot papers were out, and it was a couple of days into ballot papers. So by that point, I guess...
I remember that one. Was that the one where we were having, this was unusual, we were all having our makeup done in the same room at the same time, weren't
That's
we?
right.
So
Catching up.
at one point, all of us were in having our makeup done, and I think Hamza was having some makeup put in his beard at the time.
Makeup takes quite a long time, surprisingly. Anyway, but yeah, I guess one question then, looking back, what did you learn, and what do you regret?
Well, had I have known how popular my independence thermometer idea was going to become. No, I read it in a briefing paper that someone had given me, and I thought, oh, that's sort of intriguing. And then obviously, I think I mentioned it, I can't remember if it was the first hustings. Was it the first hustings? Second hustings. And obviously, I was ridiculed for that. So that wasn't the finest part of it. But yeah, I think in general, though, I think you do learn a lot through these processes. I felt like I learned a lot. And I think I could definitely see, or I've been told, I haven't really watched it back so much, a sort of a progress in my abilities as I went through. So that's not a bad thing. What about
You learned a lot.
Yeah.
I certainly came out of it feeling like I'd learned a lot about myself, a lot about campaigning, a lot about what to do and what not to do, and also a lot about the party. I don't know about you, but I think I read so much analysis about the party from people that just assumed they knew who the members were, what the membership wanted, and actually perhaps the final result demonstrates that we were at a crossroads and there was a lot of different views about what the party needed to do. And actually, we spent a lot of time together. In terms of all those conversations before things went live, whether that was TV debates or like party debates, considering it was a contest and it got a bit heated at times, we'd all be forced into a room the following day, sharing teas and coffees and biscuits.
With partners as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Or not in my case, but yeah.
I think that was one of my highlights, was the fact that our partners all got on probably the best.
Yeah. Well, my partner actually was offshore for most of the time, so he didn't turn up, I think, until the day of the results. Oh, yeah. So I was having sort of team members come with me instead, which was a shame. But yeah, I was wondering how you felt in terms of when we were kind of sitting around and waiting for things. Before we'd go on, I got to the point by the end where I felt like I could have given your speech and I could have given Hamza's speech. Did you feel the same way? You just knew what I would say next. You knew what Hamza would say next.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there was not a small amount of unconscious theft of people's lines and answers, because one of the challenges, I think, when it's televised too, is that everybody knows what you said at the last event and the questions are often quite similar.
We'll come on to that maybe.
And it did mean that, I think you at one point said to me, hey, that was the answer I gave yesterday. And I was sitting there thinking, hey, those were some of the answers I gave yesterday when I heard them being regurgitated by others. But it's the inevitability of the same questions.
Because you're listening to...
Exactly. And actually probably there's not a huge amount that we all disagree on in terms of the importance of independence, at the very least.
So one bit I remember was when, I think it was Glasgow, hustings, and we must have been sitting next to each other at that one, and the media had been very interested in the fact that we'd stood up at one of them, I don't know if it was that one or a previous one, where I think you said it, and I was talking about frequent flyers, you're basically making reference to the fact that there was maybe the same people, or maybe even the same people asking the same questions at each hustings. And so I think I'd written on a piece of paper and I'd pass it to you. And all the media apparently were watching and they were going, what are they saying to each other? What are they saying to each other? So do you remember that?
Absolutely, because I definitely think there was a few people that got a season ticket.
Yes.
And I don't think there was any, untoward reasons for it. Party activists.
Just very keen.
Very keen. And especially when they were sitting at the front and you could see them at the various different hustings. And then, of course, there was like staffers and other people there as well. Looking back on the televised debates, so there was 4 of them, and then there were some radio ones as well, like LBC and so on. Rate them best to worst.
I was really nervous before the first one because I don't think I'd done anything like that up until that point. And so I was standing there, but it was Colin, so I think that made it easier because he was at least a journalist that I'd had interactions with before. My reflection, that was such a tiny set.
Absolutely.
When you watch television, you have in your head that it's this massive room and there's all this space, and actually it was really tiny room. Cameras were quite close to us, and then it was quite surprising, I felt, that they let other people's team members come and stand in the room watching us as well. And that was, we don't have to talk about this if you want, but that was the point where you decided to go on a particular campaign strategy. And I remember thinking, because I was sort of watching you two, and I thought, oh, this is heating up a bit more than I expected it to. And STV afterwards, we left quite quickly. I was quite glad to have sort of got that one, got the first one out of the way, right? And so I went outside, and Colin was actually chasing us out across the car park because he wanted to talk to us. And I think they were very pleased with how it had gone, and because it was the first one and they got really good ratings. So yeah.
Behind the scenes, the stories that nobody ever knows about. So as people know, I was fresh from maternity leave, and anybody who's had a baby will know that their original clothes don't fit. And I'd left it a bit late that day to find something to wear. So of course nothing fitted. And when I say didn't fit, I mean the zip didn't go up.
That was on the day of the debate?
That was on the day, and
right.
I should have checked it out earlier, but it was a mad dash to the closest clothing store, which was of course Georgia Asda, to frantically find whatever they had in stock and run to the studio still with the tags on and try it on. And miraculously, it fitted. But I often wonder how much people at home realise that, there's prep in some areas and in some other things you're sort of going by the skin of your teeth.
Absolutely. So I would say the one I liked the least was probably the Sky one. Partly the logistics. So we were in 2 different buildings. The building where you were kind of waiting to go on and having the pre-debate prep was in one part. It was quite a long way from the other part. It was pouring with rain and it was all muddy. And then the room that we were actually doing the recording in was freezing cold, I seem to remember. And we were all kind of standing there absolutely chittering from the cold, waiting to answer our questions.
With muddy feet from having trekked from one side to another. And that the miracle was finding the place in
and it was a really unusual location as well. I think that was Fife,
But we did do a lot of touring around the country.
We certainly did.
And this is a really cruel question. Best location for one of the SNP hustings?
Do you know what? I think my favourite one might have been the Inverness one.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm not just saying that because, you're a Highlander and all that.
Local.
But it just felt like I felt there was a better atmosphere. Probably the 2 that I enjoyed the most were the one in the Borders and the one in the Highlands out of the SNP ones. I felt that the audience were more engaged is maybe not the way to explain it, but I don't know, I just enjoyed that one more. I think there was more variety of questions, perhaps, if I'm remembering that rightly. What about you?
Yeah, I would agree, actually. I think that those hustings, you could tell people really appreciated us coming. And perhaps Glasgow, Edinburgh is quite used to party events. So when you go to the Borders or you go to Inverness, there's a lot more appreciation. And the questions were a lot more local. Yeah. So I think there was a lot of questions, for example, about Highland Council and so on. And then, of course, we then went back to Inverness.
We went back, yes, right at the end, if I remember. And I have to say I was dreading the travel back up again because I was exhausted by that point, as I'm sure everyone was. And we got back up, and I remember that was the one where the journalist, whose name I can't remember, but she asked me a question. She phrased it in a very particular way, and I was quite taken aback. She said something, would you be prepared to get into bed with Alex Salmond? Do you remember that?
I do.
And I think it was just an unfortunate way that she'd phrased it, but I was a bit like, oh, I don't think you should be saying that.
Yeah. It was also, I think it was one of the best hustings.
Yes.
Because she was incredibly, it was Nikki Marr, she was incredibly pointed and direct with her questions. Yes. And you couldn't really get away.
No, she was good. I thought it was a good one.
The sort of same questions.
Yeah, because that was, I think, some of the problem with the SNP hustings is that the format was fairly flat, wasn't it? That you did your introduction and then you answered each question, and everybody got, as long as they wanted to answer each question, and they weren't really pressed on anything. So if you just filled up the time and just talk, and I wonder if maybe that's not the way to get the best out of, or to get the best answers out of people.
Yeah. Looking back then on the few days afterwards, obviously it was all up in the air, quite challenging. At that point in time, looking back on the leadership contest, did you at any point regret going for it, or were you quite glad that you did go for it?
I think there was moments during it when I did wonder, what the heck am I doing? But and we spoke a few times as well, didn't we, during it? And it was an exhausting and punishing schedule with, like we're saying, with all the travel and the sheer number of, the media debates, the S&P hustings. I think we counted it up at one point, and we thought it seemed almost more punishing than like a American presidential contest schedule, which seems incredible when you look back on it. No, because I think you have to let the dust settle a wee bit. So I think when you just come out of it, it is a bit of a surreal thing to attend the event, and then you watch someone else get it, and then we're all sitting in the audience, and you kind of wander off and everything. And it is, one minute you're so consumed by something, and so it's so intense, and then the next minute you're like, oh, what do I do now? But then after the dust settles and you sort of look at, like we were saying, what you've learned about yourself, what you've obviously improved your skills in different ways. So no, I don't. I mean, obviously things have changed. I'm not even in the same political party anymore, so many people would look at that and think, that's really strange. But no, I'm glad I did it. I think it was a very interesting, and I think it's a unique experience. Because I think I was saying that to you. I can't remember when we were talking about this before, but not many people do run in that level of contest, So it is quite an experience to have, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And
what about you? Do you regret, or how do you feel
No,
about it?
I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to do it, for how it panned out, which may surprise some people. But I guess I've spoken quite a lot over the last year about elements of it. And actually, I think it was a fascinating learning curve for me, for the party, but also for the country. I think in terms of testing some of the limits that we have around democracy, freedom of speech, and equalities more generally, which I think was really interesting. And also, I think looking back on it, it felt like it was very family friendly, ironically enough. And that may surprise people in terms of the punishing schedule that it was. But I mean, you had your partner there at some of them. The First Minister's wife was there a lot. My chauffeur-in-chief was my husband. And I remember on several occasions, SNP staffers having to babysit, both for Hamza Yousaf's children and my daughter. So it did feel like a very family-friendly event.
Yes, the Aberdeen one.
That's right.
I remember that, yeah.
And so at times I did wonder whether actually putting the offspring on the stage might at times make more sense than putting us on the stage, which is meant to be a self-deprecating.
My son, that was the only one where one of my kids came along, and my sons are older now, but one of them is at university, so I said to him, come and meet me after the hustings. And I said, you can come to the hustings if you want. He was like, nah. So then we went out for lunch, and he literally had no idea that what I was doing. He had just completely, he's not interested.
No, it was really good.
Yeah. So were you, because obviously you were a cabinet, because I was interested about this, because when we sort of all announced that we were going to do it, then the media scrutiny just immediately ramped up, didn't it? And obviously you'd been a cabinet secretary, so presumably you were more used to a more intense level of media. Would you say it was another level entirely? Were you prepared for, being in here and having as soon as the press saw you, just running towards you? Had you had any experience of that before?
No. I'd had a little bit of it at various points. So for example, when I was somewhat unintentionally promoted during the budget, there had been an element of that in terms of being pursued for questions. But no, and I don't know about you, but I think the biggest difference was going from having a sort of party position to defend to people being more interested in what you personally thought. And it's quite easy to adopt a party position. You know, that's kind of what I've done in most interviews. You know, if you're up for the party at an election, if you're up for the party in terms of defending a budget position or whatever, it's a lot easier to develop your answers. But when people are more interested in scrutinising you individually, it's quite different. There's an element that's liberating because it's about what you think, but there's an element of being quite vulnerable because you've got to make sure that your answer stacks up and is well, you know, is well evidenced, as it were. So I think that was a big difference. I don't know about you, how you felt.
It was a complete shock to me. I had no experience of that level of media before. And obviously there was that incident where I think I was just up here and I was kind of walking across, and I think it was Channel 4. Was it Channel 4? Yeah. And they kind of blocked my path, and they were trying to ask me about one of my team members and some tweets that he had done. I think it was about Nicola Sturgeon. And I felt like I had answered the question directly and tried to move on, and I couldn't move because they were all standing in front of me and there was a camera right in my face. And in that moment, you're not quite sure what to do next, because I'd never encountered that before. I now know that you can just say to them they're not allowed to impede you, and you can just ask them to get out of your way. But in that moment, you're a bit like freeze and don't know what to do next. So it was a big change for me. It's quite difficult to get used to. It was quite difficult to get used to that in the beginning, I felt. Yeah.
So I think my most remarkable moment in that regard was after the results. So the newly elected leader had left, and I was in the room where the results were declared, and there must have been a 5 or 6 deep layer of journalists and others encircling me. And I still remember one of the SNP members of staff, these arms coming in to the middle and just taking hold of me and dragging me out.
Really?
And she lost her shoes in the process.
Goodness.
I know. So she sort of dragged, and I just kept walking, irrespective of what hurdles were in front of me, out. It was absolutely fine, and I was very happy to be answering the questions. Yeah. But you do realise it's sort of people power in that.
And I don't know if that comes across when you're watching it on TV, that how intense it is when there is a lot of media there. I don't know if that comes across to the viewer so much as how it feels when you're standing there. And we're quite small. I don't know if that's got anything else to do with it, the fact that we're fairly short. So maybe it feels like it's a bit more intense. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we had various bits where we were sort of lying on the floor laughing, crying with laughter. When I would tell the story, I don't think other people would find it funny. But you know when there's just, it's a bit like it's a release moment where things have been getting on top of you and then something happens and you just like think it's really hilarious. So we had this ridiculous schedule really with all these hustings. And I think we'd agreed within ourselves that we wouldn't accept any more hustings. Remember that? And then we'd get people ringing us up and they'd be like, oh, but Kate's agreed to it. And I'd be like, for God's sake, why do they keep, And then I talked to you and you were like, no, but they rang me and they said you'd agreed to it. So I think they were playing us a little bit, and we maybe were a bit too naive to that, because I remember trying to pin Hummus down, say, please don't agree to any more hustings. So we had people ring us up. So we had this one lady, I won't name her, she rang up and she said, oh, I'm ringing on behalf of, I can't remember an example. I'm ringing on behalf of this organisation and we really want to do a hustings, blah, blah. And Kurt's like, no, we can't agree to any more hustings. So the phone goes down and she rings back 5 minutes later. And he's like, but I've just spoken to you, I've just told you can't do any more hustings. She's like, no, but I'm ringing on behalf of a different organisation. We were like, but we've just told you we're not doing any more hustings. We just thought that was hilarious, because the brass neck of, ringing back 5 minutes later to try another angle to see if you could possibly get hustings. I don't know if you had anything
No,
like
I mean,
that.
I think looking back, one of my moments of cringing, because I wouldn't say funny moments, was really characterising my experience of it. But I do remember the Times Radio hustings. And I don't know if you remember, but...
that was right at the end, wasn't it?
It was right at the
end. The last
end.
one, I think, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was there in plenty of time. I think somebody got lost getting there and somebody else was very tight. Anyway, we all stood up and I was using my iPad and there was a massive dark window behind us. So of course, all of my notes would have just been reflected in the glass of the mirror behind and probably broadcast to everyone. And of course, in your notes, you have little side comments, little comments that you would never articulate publicly. And to this day, I still have sort of cold sweat at the thought that anybody saw my
that one was different,
unedited notes.
Because that was, that felt like that was more the public came to that one.
Yes.
It was a totally different audience. And some of the lines that some people were repeating that had gone down very well in other settings were really didn't go down very well in this. And so I was like, that's interesting, that how things had been received totally differently by a different audience.
Well, I recall you got a lot of rounds of applause at that.
At that one, yes. Not so much as some of the other ones, where I was getting booed. No, I think I did, no, maybe a little bit, anyway.
Yeah.
I remember some of them I wasn't very popular. Catering, which ones do you think had the best catering?
Well, no offence to our beloved party, or my beloved party, but I don't think we did have any catering.
At the S&P ones, I don't think we did. No, I don't think. I think we got a glass of water, possibly. But the TV debates, usually they let you bring your whole team or your family or whatever, and then they would either have something before or something afterwards. And I remember our team all thought that the Channel 4 one was the best. You got
yes, that's right.
good snacks.
Yeah. Although the funny thing is, of course, you're in no fit state to eat.
No, I lost
before.
weight. I lost weight during the campaign. I just wasn't eating at all.
Yeah.
Did you?
I lost a lot of weight. I lost all my baby weight. It's
during
highly
the
recommended
contest.
as an approach to sort of postpartum weight loss.
So I couldn't eat anything, and then they were saying you can't go into a debate. You've not eaten anything all day, and so they were eventually got to the point where they worked out if they just shoved a can of Red Bull into my hand just before I went on. I was drinking that.
Yeah. Well, again, this is far too much information, but obviously I did not have a weaned baby. I had an unweaned baby, so purely on milk. So I'd get home at about 11 p.m. and then she would have breakfast, lunch, and dinner all night, and then you'd sort of until 5 a.m. and then get up and do the next day. But we learned a lot. I'll tell you, one of the most remarkable achievements was going to visit the Ukrainian refugees, so Ukrainian mothers and babies, and it had been sold to me as a meet and greet. So because I was having to find baby care on a daily basis, I thought this would be an ideal one to take along the baby. So I did. Little did I know that they were going to put me on a stage with aforementioned small child. She was 6 months old, and we were on the stage with two different translators, I think translating from English to Polish and then Polish to Ukrainian.
Right.
And we sat up there for an hour and a half, and all I had to entertain this small little person was a bobble. And I don't know if you've tried to entertain a small little person
Just
on a
with
stage
a bobble.
with a bobble for an hour and a half.
No,
But it probably
not
stands
advised,
out.
audience.
It probably stands out as one of my greatest achievements.
Yeah.
And there are still some pictures I've seen that weren't used of a small child's hand in my hair, dragging it all over. And but she didn't cry, and I still think it's a miracle.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. One point in your campaign, the campaign announced that you do a reset. I think you took a step back for a couple of days and then you came back out, and we were watching this and we thought that really worked and it was quite successful.
You're very kind in saying at one point in your campaign,
Okay.
when you really saying at the very beginning of your campaign before you'd got off the ground. But yeah, we took I think it was a day or so just to catch breath and go out again. The fascinating thing was that all of the headlines or the journalists were all talking about whether or not I'd quit. And what was so interesting is over those 24 hours, there was just this overwhelming barrage of messages saying don't quit. So it's almost like before I'd even thought of quitting, people were saying don't quit. So it was really 24 hours to take stock and figure things out and then go out. And so it was the following Monday that I went to the brewery. I seem to spend an awful lot of time in distilleries and with brewers. So we went there and I just had no idea what to expect. But it always gives me a small amount of satisfaction when you have to drag up all the central belters to Aviemore.
Yeah.
for 9 a.m. on a Monday morning.
That's
and
cruel.
they turned up because it was newsworthy.
I like that.
So yeah, I'm heartened to think you think that it worked, but it certainly allowed us to go back out, and I didn't know what to expect in that first outing. You obviously were actually one of the first to indicate you wanted to stand, because you indicated you wanted to stand very quickly.
Yeah.
And then it was almost a week later when you had a formal launch. Did that work? Do you think? It looked like it worked from my perspective. Did it work, and was there a reason for that?
Yeah, I did suspect that Nicola was going to go, so I had sort of been thinking about it. And you obviously have a look around and you think, right, who of my colleagues is going to go forward? And I did think that you would. I was pretty sure that Hamza would. I thought there was a couple of other people that I thought might stand and didn't. And so I thought I wanted to, it was exactly what you were saying. You make this, you try to make a calculation or assumption about who the membership of the party are and what they want. And so I felt I wanted to go in and talk for what I thought was a certain part of the party that wanted more action on independence for one thing, and then the women's rights as well. But there was no time. So that was probably the regret that I had, was that I think we could all have done a better campaign had we had longer. And so the reason that I didn't go straight out into the media initially is because I hadn't worked out what I wanted to say. We had to take some time, obviously, to form a team and then to come up with, what the platform that I'd be standing on was. And it was quite funny because it was a bit disjointed. We didn't know each other very well at the beginning. I think I had, four volunteers and one paid staff member that were bringing all this together. And you'll know it was insane. At one point we thought I had one 22-year-old volunteer. We thought handling more inquiries than the Scottish Government media team were getting in one day. So it was insane. And I had some of the volunteers were doing the policy platform and putting it on the website and so on. So I went onto Twitter. I didn't do this all the time, but occasionally go on just to take a temperature of what's happening. And I read one tweet and someone had said, well, I don't understand what's happening because Ash's policies are really great. She's not articulating them. And I read it and I thought, yeah, that's because at that point I didn't know what they were. Well, I did, but you know what I mean? We hadn't had time to let it bed in so that you were then able to take what you were and then articulate it really well. So I did think that was quite funny. And then there was another moment where some of the team were putting West Wing quotes in all my speeches and I didn't know about it.
Wow.
And then when someone else found out, there was this shouting and, well, I can't believe they're doing this. That's quite funny though when you look back on it.
Yeah. Well, if it worked for the West Wing.
Yeah.
That's very funny.
Oh dear.
Okay, Ash, last question. What advice would you give to somebody in your shoes this time last year? In other words, just before you run for the contest?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think it's just the timings. It just wasn't. I'm this kind of person. I like to do my research,
be prepared,
and marinate in things for a while in order to really distill down what I want to say and how to express it. So for me, I was very out of my comfort zone, having to kind of pick things up really fast and go out and do it. So I think maybe you distill things down and you just try not to be across too many things, and you just have. That was the bit that surprised me about how it was, like you were saying, it was more personal. And it was almost like, I don't know whether people were so interested in what was your policy platform on housing, or, I mean, we talked about child poverty a lot, didn't we, during the hustings and so on. And it seemed more like people were more interested in your personal characteristics maybe, and that was surprising. So I suppose that's, maybe you think about that, who are you and what sort of elements of your characteristics or personality that you want to express to the public. So that was interesting. What about you?
I think for me, it's you really got to want it, and you've really got to decide why you want it, because it is a brutal process. But then, I've never been First Minister, but from what I understand of it, it's a brutal job. And in a sense, the campaign really washes away any stupid motivations you might have, because they just don't stand up in the glare of scrutiny. And so you really have to know deep down why you want it, because that's the only thing that can motivate you to keep going when you're facing a lot of detractors or really difficult circumstances or difficult questions. And so I think to anyone who wants to go for it, it's really interesting, because I saw an interview with a politician in another party who was being asked as to whether or not they would ever want to lead their party. And they said, at the end of the day, I've seen up close what's involved, and I know that I just don't have enough in me to want to sacrifice my personal life or my family's life for the job.
Yeah.
And I think that would be it's not just a status or an achievement.
No.
You have to really believe in what you want to achieve in the job.
Yeah.
So I think that would be my encouragement to anybody thinking of ever being in that position again. Figure out why you want it, and it's got to be a strong enough reason to carry you through the difficulties.
Yeah, that's good.
Did you get this comment a lot? Because I did. From people that said, look, I may or may not have voted for you, I may or may not support you, but I really respect you putting yourself out there and going for it. And I think my respect certainly for you and for Hamza grew enormously over the course of the 5 or 6 weeks. I'd always liked you. I'd always thought you were pretty cool. But during the contest, I think that respect grew. And I guess to folks that are in politics or not in politics, particularly young people who are looking at politics and maybe being disheartened by what they see, my comment would be, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are in it for the right reasons. And if you're concerned about what you see in Scottish politics, then get involved yourself.
Absolutely. I remember, I think it was Angela Constance who said something afterwards, because I think she'd stood, hadn't she, for deputy leader at one point in the past. And I remember her saying she had enormous respect for everybody that put themselves forward, whether they supported their leadership bid or not, because I think having done it herself, possibly, you understand what it goes into, and you are putting yourself out there to be scrutinised in quite extreme ways. But I still think you can have fun with it, and I agree with you. I think that getting involved can make a change, and that's what we're doing it for at the end of the day. We all think we can achieve something for the country and for the people that live here, and we want to make things better. So
yeah. See you next year.
Yes.